All right, welcome to the Crimson Flag podcast, where we bring you a class-conscious analysis of historic and current events which are pertinent to the international working class movement. All right, my name is FBK, and we're joined today by Danky Kang. How are you doing today, Danky?
I'm doing fine. How is everybody else doing here today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good here. So we're going to be covering a couple of different issues of national, local, and international importance. We're going to dive right into that here. First, we're going to start out here with a opinion piece in Business Insider from Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. And let's see, it's called U.S. War with China over Taiwan would be foolishly costly. So I'm going to read a little bit here from this piece, and then we're going to respond. So let's see, in the piece he says, quote, in testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee last week, Administrator Phil Davidson, commander of U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific, warned that Chinese military developments looked to him like a nation planning for a war. Last year, Congress allocated $2.1 billion for the initiative. This year, Davidson is asking for more than double that amount, to $4.6 billion. In October, the U.S. Marine Corps completed construction of its first new permanent base in the Indo-Pacific area since 1952. The Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force have additional plans to establish new bases or expand existing ones in the Tinian Island, Palau, Guam, and Australia, all along the so-called First Island Chain near China's coastline. Let's see, the expansion is designed to enhance U.S. ability to conduct island hopping operations and create the ability to rapidly construct military airfields in austere environments. So why all this maneuvering? The answer is that they want quicker access to China. So quote from the opinion piece, he says, the admiral said that right now it would take U.S. forces on the West Coast more than 3 weeks to get within range of China and troops from Alaska 17 days. But the perfect speed, Davidson concluded, was being there. Let's see, just to give maybe a little more context around this. Over the past year and a half, and maybe 2 years in particular, the United States, they've been trading weapons to Taiwan and conducting all kinds of military exercises and such. And pretty much China's response to this is just to keep politely asking the United States to stop and to respect its policy, because the United States has declared that it accepts the one China policy. It's on the record as saying that that is what we're supposed to respect. So this is kind of coming on the heels of that. And of course, China's response has largely been to build up its military and defenses in the area as well. So what we're seeing is just a lot of strategic positioning right now. It's not really clear how far this is going to go. One last thing that I'll add, though, is in the opinion piece, he did say that right now, troops, if they were to engage with Chinese troops, they would have to leave from California or Alaska, which would take about a month. So they want to basically have them ready to go. If they're over there, they could be over there pretty much immediately. So it definitely shows that that they are taking this situation very seriously at the very least. Even if this whole war with China may not manifest, we see that they are at least taking this suspicion not lightly, to say the very least. So what is your opinion on all this, Danky?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like China's restraint in light of this blatant aggression from the U.S. is something remarkable to behold, considering that we're at China conducting similar military exercises and funding hostile governments close to the United States in this capacity, we would be saying that they are aggressively coming towards an invasion of our country. So, I mean, I don't know what other way the Chinese people could possibly take this than the United States is preparing to invade.
Right. And, of course they are. Their defense is going to be, or their response is going to be that they're going to say that the Chinese, that they think this is defensive, that they're building up stuff in the area because it's all defensive. But of course, when we read stuff over here, it's very much written from the angle of, well, because China is building up its military in the area, we have to respond and do that too. But one thing that I'd like to add is it is interesting. There's been like reports coming from the Pentagon even where they say it's alarming how much China is building its aircraft carriers and missiles and such. And they even say stuff like they're afraid that they're going to have more than us. But when you look at the raw numbers, it's clear that the United States just has a ton of more military weaponry. But they keep using this whole line of, oh, well, China might get more weapons than us, so we need to use more weapons, or we need to manufacture more weapons and such. So a lot of this could be, the military-industrial complex having an enemy who it knows they can kind of get support behind to manufacture more stuff. Because there is a bit of, definitely a bit of lying going on there as far as like a misrepresentation of who has how many weapons and such so far.
It sounds similar to the US-Soviet arms race during the Cold War, and there was a similar line of logic that a lot of the military industrialists push, which was, the Soviet government's going to outpace us in their nuclear arms production, so we have to escalate our nuclear arms production. Oh, the Soviets getting more ground tanks, well, we have to have more ground tanks, and it becomes this game of tug of war. But in reality, China is expanding its military infrastructure. It's doing that only for the purpose of defense, whereas we see with the United States, our military infrastructure is geared towards imperialism.
Yeah, that seems to definitely be the trend. Yeah, but this is an issue that we'll definitely keep tracking on here. It's been developing slowly for a long time. I think about this stuff and I think of, back to when we engaged, I say we, I should say like the United States engaged in a war with Japan in World War II. I was reading about it, and even back in like 1920, and so there was already writings coming out where people were saying it looks like it's very possible there could be a war between the United States and Japan. Those tensions were building for a very long time to where people, even in the 1920s, were saying there might be a war. Well, of course, we know now that 20 years later was when it finally happened. So this could be a situation. I hope this war doesn't happen, of course, but it could be soon. It could be like way down the line for all we know.
I think if a war with China does happen and it's a US attempted ground invasion of China, I think it's going to be a disaster. I mean, we thought Vietnam was bad. Try occupying a country that already has military infrastructure. Try occupying a country that, is much more materialistically wealthy than Vietnam was during the Cold War. And you've got yourself a recipe for just a horrible disaster. And there's, of course, always the potential for this war to go nuclear, and that would be a disaster for all mankind. So I don't know. The circumstances are very, very dire, and I feel like the only thing really keeping the world from descending into chaos right now is the restraint from the Chinese government. If they were as belligerent, if they were half as belligerent as the U.S. government has been, we would have been in the midst of World War III by now.
Yeah, I was about to add that comment as well. Yeah, one thing I will add is, it could very easily spark off somewhere else as well. Like we see right now with Iraq, for example, there's been rockets that have been shot at United States military facilities, and our media keeps characterizing them as like, Iranian militias and all this stuff, as if like, the people of Iraq aren't mad enough on their own to like want to resist. But, because they're labeled as Iranian militias, it could easily spark off, we know that China, they've been actually trading a lot more oil with them. I saw where it was like they're up 112% trading of oil with them. So, and then they have this military agreement as well. So we could easily see something popping up with like Iran and then maybe getting like China involved. But this is all obviously speculation. Like I said, this situation's still building, and we'll definitely keep following it.
Yeah.
But
To that, I will say I think that the U.S.'s insistence on escalating tensions with Iran is part of a wider strategy of securing oil in the Middle East and encircling China. I think it pretty much serves a dual purpose. And I think is pretty much the same thing in Afghanistan. Why we wanted to establish sort of a forward operating base in Afghanistan, we've been unable to do so. 20 years later, we've wasted countless dollars, we've ended countless lives, and we have nothing to show for it. Hooray, imperialism! Hooray, capitalism! Just nothing but a bunch of misery. That's all we have to show for it.
right, yeah, unfortunately, that is how it seems to go. Um, but yeah, from here we're going to talk a little bit about. I'm sure a lot of people have been seeing about what people have been referring to as anti-Asian hate that has been manifesting for over the past year. I even remember, when this show was previously The Iron Curtain, on some of our very first episodes, we were talking about how it seemed like there was a rising kind of xenophobia happening, and there was these crazy kind of stories happening. I remember one that we talked about was an Asian family who was attacked in a Walmart, I believe, with a knife or something wild like that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent events here, and then we're going to, respond to it. So, yeah, on Tuesday, a series of shootings were carried out at three massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. 8 people were killed, 6 of whom were of Asian descent. Later that day, a suspect by the name of Robert Aaron Long was taken into custody. In the last year, we've witnessed a stunning rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans. According to a Stop AAPI Hate study, 3,800 incidents of anti-Asian hate occurred between March of 2020 and February of 2021. Given that recent attention towards this issue has been growing in recent months, it was quickly assumed that this was a racially motivated attack. A post that appeared to be from Long's Facebook went viral after the shooting. It contains conspiracy theories related to the Communist Party of China and the coronavirus. Today, Facebook, however, confirmed that this picture was in fact a fake and Long had not made the post. So let's see. There was a terrorism expert. Her name is Mia Bloom, and she recently compared this attack with the 2020 attack on an erotic Toronto spa by, let's see, it was a 17-year-old self-described incel. So that's kind of been the debate. Is it's like people have been saying, is this a sexually motivated crime, or is it like coming from anti-Asian bigotry? But I think it's fair to say, on one hand, regarding the anti-Asian or anti-China stuff in the media, it's clear that the media has some type of role in fostering this whole just atmosphere of like China fear and just suspicion of Asian people in general by the way they've characterized the coronavirus. And obviously we know that goes for like liberal and conservative media outlets largely. But as far as this individual person, see, I saw that post too, where it was going around and it was saying, yeah, CCP made the coronavirus in the Wuhan lab and all this stuff. But apparently that was a fake picture and he didn't actually make that post. If anybody out there saw that. But nonetheless, I did read where when the police were interviewing him, it does seem like some of the information they gave was, I guess he was, what was it? He had to go to rehabilitation for a sexual addiction and was actually kicked out of his family's house. Yeah, so there was several incidents, affecting his life that were, revolved around his sexual addiction. And it's clear that he probably visited these parlors or whatever. But Danke, I remember you on Twitter. I don't know how early on you said this, but I remember you kind of early on saying that you thought this may be an incel. Was that correct?
Yeah,
I think you might have called it.
I don't want to, stereotype, but I mean, if there ever was like an incel, this is like the image of a person that would pop into your mind when you think of the word incel. The guy looks like he just eats straight corn, just like right off the stalk. And I mean, he was just. I mean, look at him. He has this wizard neck beard thing going on. If he does not have an incel manifesto, I would be extremely surprised. There's also, things to be said. If this guy is an incel, there's a lot of stereotypes that incels do, especially particularly in regards to Asian women. Asian women are very idealized and fetishized by these weird creeps, and this might have something to do with it. Maybe he wanted a Japanese waifu and he couldn't get his waifu, and so he goes on a rampage of revenge. But either way, I'm sure that Donald Trump constantly stoking this anti-Asian sentiment, all the Republican Party's dog whistling and fear mongering about China, I'm sure it hasn't helped. I'm sure it certainly hasn't helped the circumstance. And for many, it provides fuel to their already underlying hatred of Asian people and just any ethnic minority, really. They view them all as a threat.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right. And, something I do want to add quickly here is that, so I guess the police, they also did say that when they apprehended him, he was on his way to Florida. And he was planning to do something at a porn industry of some sort, some type of shooting. So this was some type of whole, rampage against, all his frustrations or whatever. But yeah, I know another thing that's been going around about this is Captain Jay Baker of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Department said that Long was having, quote, a really bad day. And, Captain Baker, he had a picture from his Facebook where he must have printed off these t-shirts himself, because in the picture it shows these printed off t-shirts where it says COVID-19 imported from China to New York. And next to the picture, he shows a store where you can like make your own t-shirts. And he's like, says something like, I love these shirts. So it's just funny to see this guy. It's crazy to see this guy. He shoots up these massage parlors. He targets these Asian women. And then this police officer, he's saying, oh, well, he's just having a really bad day. And sure enough, he's like a, COVID-19 China virus kind of guy.
Yeah, it's funny how the color of your skin really reflects the police response in this country. It's, if he was a person of color, shot up 2 massage parlors, I'm pretty sure the cops would have no qualms, shooting him in the face, putting him down. But if it's a white guy, oh, well, he's having a bad day.
Right. It's wild. And, today, I believe they had a Senate meeting on what they called something along the lines of like anti-Asian hate in America or something. And there was different politicians who spoke today. And I didn't get the chance to watch most of this. I was reading a little bit about it, but something that stuck out to me immediately was Chip Roy, Republican. And let's just take a look here at this video to see what Chip Roy had to say at this anti-Asian hate meeting that they had today.
The victims of race-based violence and their families deserve justice. And as the case, what we're talking about here with the tragedy, what we just saw occur in Atlanta, Georgia. I would also suggest that the victims of cartels moving illegal aliens deserve justice. The American citizens in South Texas that are getting absolutely decimated by what's happening at our southern border deserve justice. The victims of rioting and looting in the streets last week, businesses closed, burned last summer, deserve justice. We believe in justice, right?
So, I mean, already right off the bat, I can notice he is equating this terroristic racist act against the Asian American community with the struggle for social justice seen in the George Floyd riots of this summer. And I feel like the race baiting he's doing here is so obvious and so disgusting that, anyone who isn't just a diehard chud can see through this.
Yeah, it's quite a way to start his whole rant here. You can see where he's going, but it gets much worse. Let's see.
I think there's an old saying in Texas about, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree.
Oh, God.
We take justice very seriously, and we ought to do that. round up the bad guys. That's what.
I mean, do we even need to like comment about why citing lynching is not probably the best symbol of what we want justice to be like in 2021?
Yeah, finding the longest ropes and the tallest trees. I mean, it's pretty much obvious what you're referencing here. And when they asked Chip Roy here about his comments, they've been saying that he was glorifying lynching. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, no, I wasn't glorifying lynching." And then he responds with, "But I oppose the Chinese Communist Party, and we don't need to be like them," or something like that. And it's like, what a way to respond. That was very much a theme from what I was able to gather, was that while this was going on, this meeting today, the Republicans were going back to, well, what about the CCP? And obviously that's not very much of the question at hand when the question is anti-Asian American, hate here. So it's just kind of amazing to see, we see things, sometimes we aren't really surprised from these Republicans, but that was definitely one that that definitely surprised me. I thought that was pretty shocking, to just go out and just say, yeah, we need to go back to the days of lynching. And I don't really, I mean, what was he getting at there? I mean, I guess he was saying, so he's saying, oh, you guys are talking about social justice, but we need to go back to the days of like real justice, of just taking people out and executing them.
It's also part of the big circle jerk that politicians do to appear tough on crime. Like, oh, I'm tough on crime. I'm just going, anytime somebody breaks the law in my land, I'm just going to lynch them on top of a tree. And it's that sort of like, oh, my balls are so big, I can't even fit them in my pants sort of projection that they want to instill in their voting base is why, I think that's the primary reason they say this. And then he says, like, I stand against the CCP. Well, congratulations, dude. I'm pretty sure that Xi Jinping doesn't give a shit about what you think about the CCP. like, congratulations. Like, I'm pretty sure that the officials in the Communist Party in China are just sitting awake in their bed at night, worrying about what Chip Roy will say, how he will besmirch their name.
Yeah, and it's just funny because he's saying, yeah, we should go back to the days of like executing people, but we obviously know that China, they don't just apply that to the lower classes, and that you actually see billionaires getting the death penalty in China and such. So it's just funny to see him say, we don't need to be like China. We need to go back to the days of the death penalty. It's just kind of strange to see that argument.
Right. And it's like the implication of these extrajudicial killings, like, oh, let's just hang him by a tree, no questions asked. It's like that's what led towards the George Floyd protests in the first place. And it's, the reaction from police violence that has sponsored this protest. And then they turn around and say the answer to that is more police violence, more death penalty, more judicial killings. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer, more, repression and such. But, this, while we're on this topic, this isn't coming just from the Republicans, although I will add that it's in a very different form when the Democrats express this kind of, I don't want to, they've been using the word anti-Asian hate, but there's different forms that this thing has. Obviously, we're seeing from the Democrats, they're targeting China's human rights, and they're more along this line. So, yeah, I'm not trying to say that they're stoking racial hatred, but inadvertently, they are still kind of fanning the flames of this whole toxic atmosphere. So, yeah, let's go on here. Let's see. I believe we got a video here of AOC, what she has been talking about recently. So let's check this out.
Today to commemorate the 62nd anniversary of Tibetan Uprising Day. I have the honor of representing an incredibly diverse community of individuals, home in New York 14, many of whom who are Tibetan. And in fact, one of the largest constituencies of Tibetans in the world makes its home in New York 14. For decades, the Tibetan people have bravely fought for their freedom, including to seek and fight for the freedom to simply be Tibetan, to speak their language, to practice their Buddhist religion, to sustain their culture, their traditional medicine, their land, and to live freely in their own country. It is the responsibility of all those who value freedom of speech and expression to stand with them against gross human rights abuses. I am proud to stand with the Tibetan residents of New York 14 and all those across the country in their righteous fight against persecution.
Yeah, and this is something that she has actually been talking about in the past recent months. I wish I had this information directly on me, but during the last COVID stimulus that they sent out, I believe it was a $600 one, there was things in the package that she fought for that she wanted included, and I believe it did make it through. But it was actually giving money towards Tibetan opposition kind of groupings or human rights groups, or however they prefer to, word it. But so this is something that she's been on for a while. Obviously, she's saying that because she's representing New Yorkers, they have a large Tibetan community, and therefore she's representing their interests. But it's the irony here is obviously that these people are living in New York. I mean, they are of Tibetan descent, and it's just interesting to see. This is obviously another country, and you're saying I'm representing New Yorkers, but their homeland needs to be freed, and they need to be able to speak their own language, which is probably the most perplexing part of this whole thing. Normally we hear these kind of arguments made, but it would be more, I suspected her argument to be more broad and just kind of vague and say they need freedom and freedom of speech and such. But then she says they need to speak their own language. And I saw the numbers. I think it was like 98% of Tibetans speak their home language. So it's just very confusing to see. I also know that, in Tibet in particular, like when you go to college, even if you're somebody of like Han descent, if you're going to that region to study in school, you are going to do it in the local language, which I will say is different than the Soviet Union. That was kind of a critique that a lot of people had, like in Ukraine, for example, later on. I don't know how it was earlier, but I know later on in the Soviet days, a lot of the schools in Ukraine were in Russian, and that was just something that was kind of pissing the local people off a lot. But China seems to have taken the opposite approach, where they actually encourage the local language enough that they make, the main ethnic group, Han people, they have to learn that language too if they want to study there. So yeah, what was your takeaways from that take she gave, Danky?
I mean, first of all, can we just talk about like how loathsome of a snake-like politician AOC really is? I mean, people really don't crap on her enough, and I think it's because she's young, she is popular, she plays video games, so there is a waifu element to that, but there's also this sort of like, oh, she is the hero for the little guys, she's the hero for the common people, and she's going to push a progressive agenda when she gets into Washington. The same with all of these Justice Democrats. They're going to somehow push the Democratic Party left. And in actuality, as predicted, rather than pushing the Democratic Party left, the Democratic Party just sort of absorbed them, and they became part of the establishment. Alexandria Cortez has called Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear. And I think that's cringy as fuck. But, and you see her stoking this Tibetan nationalism, which is clearly part of this anti-China sentiment. But it's a way to attack China from this sort of woke synthetic left that has been fostered in the United States. There's nothing remotely socialistic whatsoever about AOC's agenda, whether her policies are geared towards domestic or foreign application. Her international policies, as we can clearly see, are deeply and fundamentally flawed and misinformed. They reflect U.S. imperialism, standard U.S. imperialism. And she can talk all the talk she wants about helping the American workers, but she's made it abundantly clear she doesn't care about the workers of the world. She doesn't care about the workers, especially of the third world. So, yeah, I mean, she's just another hack politician.
Yeah, and I think those are good points. And I guess I don't have the answer to this question. I really wonder who she's trying to signal to here, because when I'm thinking about this, I don't see the Tibetan community being that huge of a voting bloc in New York. I may be wrong about that. I could be totally wrong about that. But I just wonder if could you really argue that they're that significant of a voting bloc that she really needs them to get elected again, and that she's just trying to get votes from people in her community? Or is she trying to signal to the, regime change apparatus, in our government, that she is kind of on their side, and that they may have their differences at times, but still at the end of the day, she wants to spread freedom around the world. So she may be doing some signaling to that kind of group. But that's my biggest question, I guess, when I finished watching this. I wonder, because when she talked about this the last time, which was in December, I believe, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. But to see her still going on and on about this, it is, definitely notable. Yeah, and of course, this is all amidst, well, I should say this is in the aftermath of force the vote and all of that. And now she's using language of like, we need to fight for $15 minimum wage and all this stuff. So people were saying, like, what are you really fighting for? That's kind of, at this moment in time, that's the question that a lot of people are asking is, what are you fighting for? Since you used a lot of fighting kind of rhetoric. And it's just interesting to see her fighting for this while not fighting for the other causes that she says that she supports. So that's another bit of irony to add on top of this. But yeah, I know, Danke, that you had some information that you wanted to give about the Indian farmers' protest. I know this has been like an ongoing situation for a long time, and it's so great to see that this is still happening. So yeah, what's up with that so far?
Yeah, so the India farmers' protest, or the Delhi Chalo, began in June of last year. So Prime Minister Modi, who is a right-winger, he passed new agricultural reform laws. And to understand the impact that this has on India's economy, approximately half of India's labor force consists of farmers. And in the 1960s, there were a series of droughts that led to famines. And this sparked a government-led quote-unquote green revolution, and these measures serve to modernize agriculture. They then created from there a food surplus and instituted a nationwide food marketing system, which wasn't perfect, but it provided government oversight and government control over the prices of agricultural goods. And this is very important when we talk about these reform laws, because all of this was undone. Now, agriculture was 50% of the national economy in the late 60s, but that sector has now shrunk. It's now just 15%. So we're seeing these that farmers in India are already struggling to make ends meet. 52% of farming households are in debt, and they are currently undergoing a suicide crisis where Indian farmers are killing themselves. Approximately 20,000 suicides occurred from Indian farmers in the last 3 years. And so all of that brings us to the June 2020 farm reform laws. So there was a series of 3 acts that passed. The first act created free and unregulated trade spaces outside the market. So what this essentially does is create a 2-market system. The markets that the government oversees, and then this Wild West free trade market. And inevitably, the free trade Wild West markets are going to starve out the government-controlled markets. it leads to corporate domination. And that is the trend you'll see with all three of these acts, is it ultimately leads towards corporate domination of India's agriculture. So the second act creates a framework for contract farm deals. So this leads to farmers signing predatory contracts and exclusive contracts with big corporations, which, are of course going to take advantage of their dire circumstances. And then there's the third act, which eliminates government price control of crops. And this allows corporations to buy up the entire supply and sell it for however much they want. So, essentially, the conclusion here is that the Modi government seeks to fundamentally screw over farmers by allowing big capitalists to dominate the agricultural sector of India's economy. We've seen historic highs for this protest. We've seen millions and millions of people come out and participate in this strike from the most remote parts of India all the way towards the largest cities. And there's this major movement to march towards Delhi. And the major highways are plugged up by these protesters and these brave strikers who are fighting to withstand corporate domination. And I pointed out on Twitter that lots of communists in India were at the helm of leading this farmer strike. And I don't know if this was an attempt to sort of control the narrative or what, but we had several people point out that communists were not at the helm of this farmers' strike, that the farmers' unions are. And I want to ask our audience to put their thinking cap on for a second and ask themselves, who are actually in these farmers' unions? Well, probably communists, right? So, yeah. And so in a roundabout way, yes, communists are at the forefront. They are at the helm of leading this farmers' protests.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that a lot of, I assume mostly leftist type people who are aware of this situation are the ones who are saying, oh, communists aren't leading this, because I assume because they are not communists themselves, so they don't want to give credit to, our ideology. But I was looking on Twitter, just looking around to see what people were posting about this, and I saw where there was a lot of people saying that these farmers, they're agitators who are paid by the Communist Party of China, and they're leading all this. And so the people who are against the protest, they're blaming communist leaders of the protest and saying that they're bought out by the CCP. So, I mean, obviously, I don't believe that China's involved in this in any way, shape, or form. But, that's the other side's argument. So, yeah. And, one thing that I'll add is it is just crazy how this is just so ignored by the media over here. I should have double checked, but I don't know how often, if even one time, that like CNN or NBC or anything is even commented on these protests. If so, I assume it's probably been in passing. But this is a massive situation, and it's just gotten utter silence. And I was driving home one day, and I happened to be on the interstate, and I was very surprised to see that in the city where me and Danke live, there's actually a sign on the interstate, and it says, the Memphis Sikh community stands with the Indian farmers. So somebody actually, or an organization, bought a billboard supporting the Indian farmers, like in our city. Somebody involved with the Memphis Sikh community, the religious, group. So I was very surprised to see that in my town, because this is just not talked about at all.
Right. You see nothing about this on the mainstream media. You see nothing about this on CNN or NBC. All they can talk about is, how good Joe Biden is and how wonderful of a job he's doing, and they can't be bothered to look at this massive riot, this massive strike rather, which is the largest one in history, I believe, and report it in any kind of meaningful way. And I think it's because they're afraid that if people see the working class coming out in such numbers in their home countries, or in India, then they will sow discontent and discord in their own home countries. They'll start thinking, why can't we rise up?
Yeah.
And to that, I want to ask the question, why can't we? What's stopping the American working class from taking to the streets right now and plugging up the highways just like these Indian farmers have done? Absolutely nothing. It's just the will to do it. That's the only thing that we lack.
Yeah, and I will add this about India. It's just so amazing to see their communist culture that they have. And I will admit that you really have to go out of your way to discover this. I, for one, discovered this I haven't had a Facebook for a while, and I decided to make like a communist kind of Facebook page. And I immediately was added by a ton of people from India, like hundreds within the first 2 days of me having this Facebook. And they just share like the most amazing videos from what looks like just their towns of people engaging in marches, carrying like hammer and sickle flags. I saw this one amazing video. I really want to find it and start sharing some of these on here because they're not on YouTube. But there was one where it was a performance, like they were at a concert, and it was a bunch of people dancing with like Che Guevara flags. So they have just this whole revolutionary culture that we obviously have not fostered yet. And one thing that I'd like to say about this is the next time you hear somebody say, oh, hammer and sickles, alienate people, it scares people away, which if you want to talk about messaging and the way in your aesthetics, I think it is important to, consider how much of this imagery should we use, stuff like that. But, just talking about the hammer and sickle exclusively, there's a lot of people that say you shouldn't use that at all. That scares people away. And look at these average just kind of people from India. They still rock these kind of symbols. And, what makes America so better where we should abandon the rest of the working class of the world who are still using this imagery. But we're so much better. And we've just decided that we are like better than the rest of them and we don't have to use it anymore. But we're still in an international struggle with them, I guess. But so it's just kind of funny to see people put that down over here and say that you couldn't have a mass movement with that kind of imagery. And it exists in India to the insane degree.
And it's interesting you should mention that because I just had a conversation with Comrade Scott from Vermont about the nature of communist imagery and iconography. And we asked ourselves that question, like, what happens if you show the hammer and sickle? It's more likely to alienate the white petty bourgeois that you see here in the United States, especially liberal types, but it will attract the people that it needs to attract. We're not necessarily trying to attract white petty bourgeois into the party ranks. We're trying to attract people of color, immigrants, the people who suffer the most under the yoke of capitalism are the ones who are most likely to rebel against it. I mean, it's common sense, folks. And here in our community that is mostly African American, it would be extremely remiss of us to shy away from showing, for example, Fred Hampton, a black an icon for the Black Panther Party and a personal hero of mine, because of some fear that, it might alienate some white middle class liberal. That's it shouldn't get in your way of reporting your message and putting your message out there. And we shouldn't have to shy away from calling ourselves communists. There are too many people who fought and died for the name of in the name of communism for us to shy away and slink away. And I think that tendency to do so presents almost sort of a Western chauvinist, American chauvinist idea. Oh, we don't want to associate ourselves with any previous movement, any sign of international solidarity. We want to present a new way. It's Marxism, Americanism. It's our new approach. And in order to do that, we can't show the hammer and sickle. We can't show any signs of international solidarity.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is where a lot of people's minds go. I think the Indian communist parties that are involved with this, I think one of the things that they have on their side is that I think they very much try and lead by example. And therefore, by doing so and helping in their communities, if there was any stigma around the hammer and sickle, which I'm sure there still is in India, it was seems to have been removed for a large amount of people who have seen people using that kind of imagery in their towns. So even if somebody has a predisposition about when they see that kind of stuff, it could change. When you lead by example. So like you said, why abandon it? Like what makes us better? But yeah, I really liked how you went into the economics of that whole issue and everything, because that is super important to understanding this protest. Um, but yeah, to finish out our show here today, I want to finish with a local issue um, that me and Danke have been following. So recently, here in the city of Memphis, there's been a pipeline that has been gathering a lot of controversy. So one way that we should start off this story right here is mentioning that Memphis, we have a very famous aquifer where we get our water from. And Danke, I believe you were telling me that it's probably the largest aquifer that we're probably the largest city that runs off of an aquifer of that sort. So we have very clean water here, which is seeming to be very important recently, given that, we all remember how Flint, Michigan went. And I remember a couple years back, there was some issues with lead in the water in New Jersey. And right now, I believe that there is an issue in Jackson, Mississippi as well right now. So the people of Memphis, since we have such great water, they're concerned that this pipeline will end up affecting our water as well. Well, actually, I should probably have you explain this, Danke. Could you explain to everybody how the aquifer works here?
Yeah, so an aquifer is basically a natural water reservoir that is protected above by layers of sand and clay, which serve to filter out any impurities or trace metals that could be in the water. And it pools in this reservoir below. And Memphis has a series of artesianal wells which tap directly into this natural aquifer to provide some of the cleanest drinking water in the world. I mean, it really is a marvel of nature, and I think it's one of our most precious natural resources, especially considering the future impact that climate change will have on our environment. We reached peak oil, I believe, 2 decades ago. And so the construction of this pipeline will become less and less relevant as time goes on. Whereas our possession of a natural aquifer is going to be much, much more important as time goes on. And I'm talking about like in the next century time scale. We're going to see lots of cities face a problem where as the sea level rises, their local aquifers become contaminated with salty ocean water. And so all of a sudden, this freshwater aquifer becomes salty and brackish. And when that happens, you're screwed. You have to go elsewhere for your drinking water. And so Memphis, because it's so inland, ocean rise doesn't really pose a threat towards our aquifer. So we're really insulated from that. And it just makes sense that in the future, our natural aquifer is going to be probably the most precious resource our city has. And the oil company Valero has tried, who is the company trying to construct this pipeline. They have argued that doing this will provide energy to the city of Memphis and will provide benefits to the city of Memphis in the forms of tax breaks. Now, this is ridiculous. First of all, let's talk about why we are using oil to power a city right next to one of the largest rivers in the world. We could very easily construct a hydroelectric dam right off the Mississippi River and power probably the entire Mississippi River Valley area from Memphis down to New Orleans, to be quite honest. And so the fact that we're still backing this dying oil industry while we have natural resources that we can use to power our city is completely ridiculous. So this argument that the oil company makes for energy needs is completely unsubstantiated. And then secondly, the amount of money that Memphians would receive in the form of tax relief would be at the detriment of risking the pollution of our entire public drinking water supply. I mean, the likelihood that this pipeline is going to burst at a certain point is almost 100%. It's almost guaranteed to happen. And so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when this pipeline bursts, that's going to be it. It's going to be over for the aquifer. And Memphis is going to be the next Flint, Michigan.
And yeah, it's two companies. Yeah, you're right. It's Valero Energy and it's Plains All American Pipeline. And Plains All American Pipeline, they're based out of Texas, I believe. And they don't have the greatest history or the greatest track record when it comes to, pipeline spills and stuff. They've had some of the largest in parts of Canada and California, I saw. So one of the issues here is that these two companies, they actually got something which is called Nationwide Permit 12, which is basically a fast track. So normally when you are trying to build a pipeline through people's, under people's houses, you have to go through the community and get their permission on certain things. Now, of course, the companies, they still have to buy out the mineral rights to people's land. But with this Nationwide Permit 12, they can basically not have to go to the community and explain to them what's going on, where they're at in the process. They can just get it done and just be like, okay, it's finished. Whereas before, there was some dialogue that was necessary. So the company saying that they're doing this and that this will benefit the community is very interesting, given that they don't want to even engage with the community. And this has been being planned since like 2019, but it's finally starting to look like they're moving quicker and they want to build this, in the next year or so, they say. So besides the pipeline of possibly affecting our drinking water, there's also the issue of where the pipeline is located. It's actually it's planned to be located under a predominantly Black area, which is referred to as Boxtown. And this town right here, this neighborhood called Boxtown, it actually goes back to like the 1880s, and it was like a freedmen's community where former slaves, they moved there to live. And it still is a predominantly Black community today. And so a lot of people are saying that this is just a clear-cut example of environmental racism. And it's garnered a lot of national attention from different politicians and celebrities even who've called out this situation. And, over the last weekend, me and Danke actually went to a rally, and there was, let's see who all was there. There was people from Boxtown. They were actually talking about the way that these companies were trying to buy their property from them in shady kind of ways. And Al Gore actually showed up. He came and gave his support. So me and Danke were there and we witnessed Al Gore. So that was pretty interesting. But
Excelsior.
Yeah. So, but one of the most interesting things about that rally was definitely hearing from the people of Boxtown. They were explaining how these companies first came in and weren't offering them any money at all. And they said that the company actually sent in like a Black representative and was trying to get them just to sign it away for free. And they slowly went up to like $100 to $500, all the way up to thousands of dollars. And there are a couple of people who are speaking out and they really don't want to sell their mineral rights. So the question has really come down to the city of Memphis, because I guess there are sections of the pipeline that would run through public property. So because the city now has to make a decision if they will allow it to be done. And I believe they're kind of meeting on that now. So we're going to see how that goes. But the city have not been wanting to deal with this. They've been saying it's a state issue. So now it's in their hands. But you were about to make a comment there, Danke?
Yeah. I believe Memphis City Council did have a meeting about this, and they voted to oppose the pipeline. But like FVK said, responsibility might have been deferred to the state level, and there are additional steps to take place. The oil companies will very most likely try to sue the city. They really want this pipeline built. They're desperate to cash in because they know that oil is a dying industry. They know that there's going to be a natural shift towards renewables. And so they're trying to cash in and construct as many pipelines as they can because they need to cash in.
Right. Yeah, that's basically where it's at. And we've talked about this a little bit. I mean, when any company when they produce a product, they always have a certain number that they expect to be destroyed. And it's always just a little bit cheaper to let that small little number get destroyed than fix the problem. And it's no different than the oil company. They know that these things are going to happen. They don't know when or where, but it's much easier for them to just keep going as is instead of really just kind of cracking down and make sure that the problem doesn't happen again. So
right.
There's no accountability.
Yeah, and any sort of environmental regulation that they might violate on paper, they'll just pay the fine and be on their way. And you guys don't understand, like, they have so much money, they don't care about fines. Fines mean nothing to them. They don't even make a dent in their wallet. So yeah, they'll keep paying the fines and violating environmental regulations as long as they can. They're going to cut corners as much as they possibly can because that's what they do. That's how they make money. And if it wasn't Valero doing it, it would have been Shell, or it would have been VP, or it would have been BP or Exxon or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And, when you talk about this area, it's actually located in South Memphis. There is an oil refinery there. That's what they want to connect another one in Mississippi to, which is like 45 miles away. But I believe that even the people of the people of South Memphis, they have a cancer rate that is like 4 times higher than the rest of the national average. So it's always been a little bit of it's always been a concern that area has been facing environmental racism because of that oil refinery right there. So this just exacerbates the problem if it comes into fruition. So we'll definitely be following this and update everybody. But we appreciate everybody here for listening to our first episode. Did you have any closing comments you want to make, Danky?
No, that about sums it up. But I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in and watching the latest episode of the Crimson Flag podcast.
Definitely. We will catch y'all later. Thanks for listening. Peace.